As I start to walk us through how our hurricane forecasting systems work, and the important role that different types of sensors play in forecasting hurricanes accurately, I want to first emphasize that the issues of accuracy and adequate technology predate Donald Trump. Our agencies have rarely had the necessary funding to adequately address the challenges posed by a changing climate. Everything from radar gaps from stationary radar systems to hurricane forecasting, where we can have more flights or better improvement in our meteorological data sets. Thus, the deep cuts that the Trump administration has made have had profound impacts on systems that were already treading water. Hurricane forecasting requires multiple types of data. So that includes satellite imagery, where they see in the infrared and visible light spectrum, low orbiting satellites that capture microwave data from the microwave spectrum of light, buoys and stationary systems, weather balloons, and so on. And each sensor picks up on different energy wavelengths than the rest. And together they create a composite of a storm. And that is how we base our hurricane forecasting. And we've gotten pretty good at it. We've made vast improvements, especially over the last 15 years. So we use these technologies together to understand the internal structure and mechanisms of a hurricane. Without it, we would be back in the dark ages of forecasting, where a sudden intensification of a storm could wipe out Galveston, Texas. At the end of this month, the Department of Defense is decommissioning half of our low orbiting microwave satellites, and we'll no longer be sharing that data with NOAA or the National Weather Service. Half. Microwave data is incredibly important because of multiple reasons, but here are the two principal ones. First, visible light is not visible at nighttime, so those satellites that operate in the visible light spectrum can't track a storm overnight. Second is because microwave energy penetrates through the cloud tops, which allows us to see the internal structure. It helps us identify where the central low pressure point is, or the eye wall. It helps us see motion and movement in the hours of rapid intensification, and helps us better project rapid intensification where we think it might be happening. And they're decommissioning half of those at the end of July. Initially, they gave the National Hurricane Center 1 week to plan for this data to be cut off, but there was such outrage at the National Weather Service and Hurricane Center that they delayed it until the end of July. And this comes at a time when rapid intensification of storms is becoming more frequent, and storms can and have intensified from lower level, tropical storms category 1s to major hurricane status overnight. And a NOAA spokesperson responded to concerns from the scientific community and this data loss by claiming that other sensors will compensate. But that's not how sensors work. You can't change the function or the reception of wavelengths on a sensor remotely. These are a specific device equipped to a satellite or an airplane, or however it's being launched, that can only interpret data from that specific wavelength. And one of the alternative data systems that you said to pick up slack was weather balloons. And they were recently subject to their own dramatic cuts. Back in April, 10% of our national weather balloon launching sites completely stopped launching. Another quarter of our launch sites have reduced to once a day instead of twice a day, and some of them even once every other day, which means the amount of data that we're getting in, there are longer gaps between it, it's less accurate. If you've been wondering why your weather map is maybe not quite so accurate these days, that's part of the reason why. And NOAA says they plan to launch one new microwave sensor next year, maybe, which is not a replacement for the total 50% that they're taking down. And so when they take these down, it not only affects the geographic swath that we can see, the amount of space that's covered by each flight, but it also increases the amount of time between passovers of that sensor. And so we'll be having fewer places scanned less frequently, which is incredibly dangerous as we now enter the peak of hurricane season, which is typically in the first week of September. With weather stations shuttering and attacks on equipment by domestic terrorists, Existing issues like radar gaps have also been exacerbated. Earlier this year, the Jackson, Kentucky National Weather Service station was without an overnight meteorologist when a tornado touched down, and it managed to get through one small town before warnings could go out because it was not detected. The tornado in 2020 that destroyed my parents' home, the EF4, that was nearly 1.5 miles wide, touched down in a radar gap, and there was no alert or warning to anybody who was there. These were existing issues that we had hoped we would improve upon, not make worse, because they are life and death. 3 of my neighbors died, and people in Kentucky that were serviced by that weather station died. And we are not in a point of privilege to be cutting back. We should be expanding. We should be better funding these resources. To cut 50% of our low orbiting microwave sensors because they also happen to collect data on the poles and the ice density and a lot of climatological data is literally saying, I don't care if more people die from hurricanes as long as those people don't get their climate data anymore. And that's incredibly dangerous and arrogant to just assume we had technology to compensate. It's also very ignorant of our field for a spokesperson to claim that other sensors can just change to reading satellite or change to reading microwave, because that's not how it works. And overwhelmingly, because of the personal nature of this for me, it's really hard to find composure and talk about this, because we were struggling as a field before to get the amount and types and geographic coverage for data that we needed for a whole host of environmental monitoring systems. And we've so depleted those systems that we do not have the functionality required to accurately monitor and project hurricane paths, which is something that we haven't had since the 1980s. This is a problem that has not existed since like the 1980s. I'm going to continue to do my best, and we'll closely watch hurricanes as they develop this season, as I always do every single year. But looking back on how I've processed data myself, I can't imagine losing satellite data at 8 p.m. and then waking up at 7 a.m. to find that there's a monster storm that appeared and people have a day to prepare, if that, to get out. And the damage and devastation that will be to communities, many of which I'm a part of and care deeply about. So that's the breakdown on why cutting 50% of our microwave sensors is going to be devastating this hurricane season.